They claim to deliver unity and enlightenment. Their machinery shines brilliantly. Their rhetoric sparks optimism. Yet, hidden under that flawless plating and lofty declarations is a horror far worse than any tyrant's vision. The greater good isn't mere ideology. It's a cage you didn't even realize was closing around you. Once, I trusted in flawlessness, in the pure structure of intent, in the orderly framework of a civilization free from flaws or uncertainty. I recall gazing from the observation platform of our exploration ship as we escaped the pull of the disputed planet Corveza, seeing our armada's spotless white exteriors reflect the glow of a foreign star, the fifth sphere expansion, a title that felt like fate itself. I am Shazui Tfar of the Fire Caste, survivor of 3 wars and marked with the honors of Viola. I have slain for the greater good. I have scorched planets to refine them. I have extended redemption with one fist while delivering oblivion with the next, and with every beat of my heart, I held firm that our course was just and essential until I witnessed the real price of flawlessness. The shuttle jolted fiercely as we pierced the air layers, energy barriers glowing azure against the drag of descent. Beside me, my squad ran through gear inspections with drilled precision, every action sharp, every motion sparing. We embodied a millennium of deliberate evolution, our forms and thoughts engineered for one sole aim. I took pride in that, honored to be molded by a force beyond my own. Corveza served as a human extraction colony, crude and wasteful like all their works, a malignant sprawl of factories and devotion that had overrun the northern landmass. Air refineries spewed raw fumes into the pale slate heavens. Living quarters jutted like shattered fangs from the ravaged ground, an ideal prospect for uplift. We touched down at the edge of the main outpost, a vast factory hub labeled Extraction Point Alpha by headquarters. The Watercast envoys had already met the world leader, presenting the usual conditions of surrender, the hollow assurances of self-rule under imperial oversight, a ritual we observed prior to the unavoidable. Akin to alerting quarry right before the pursuit, I still recall the odor as the landing hatch dropped. Bitter chemical waste mingled with the reek of unclean humanity. Aerial probes had scanned the zone, marking guard posts and civilian hubs. My commander, Shassel Kais, divided zones via swift gestures. My unit took the living area, a maze of modular shelters circling a core trading plaza. Our directives were straightforward. Few losses, total obedience. The humans weren't warriors. They were diggers, mechanics, everyday workers ensnared by forces they couldn't grasp. As we advanced in our combat armor along their lanes, they peered from shadowed doorways with bulging, fearful stares. Some bolted, some dropped to their knees, some hurled insults in their rough speech. I sensed only compassion for them. How might they fathom the events unfolding? To their eyes, we were intruders, overlords, aliens. They failed to see we carried balance, cohesion, meaning, that we granted them entry into an awe-inspiring whole. We set up an advance base in a structure that seemed administrative. Human glyphs and figures swiftly stripped away, supplanted by the Empire's round insignia. Ethereal Anel Ta Cass had joined our mission in person, an uncommon distinction underscoring the priority this planet held for leadership. I'd never been so close to an ethereal. I'd caught distant views of them at rituals, sensed the wave of awe sweeping assemblies at their arrival. But sharing a space, inhaling the same breath, this felt profound. Though the ethereal stepped into the operations hub flanked by a handful of watercast aides and firecast sentries, he exuded calm entirely. His motions flowed smoothly, without haste. His eyes, broader than ours in the firecast, held layers of mercy and insight that stirred a sharp longing in my core. When he addressed us, his tone sang gently, easing unrest. The stress and strain of battle readiness dissolved. My thoughts sharpened, free of clutter or hesitation. I experienced a bond to an immense, impeccable entity, a feeling of alignment that overshadowed personal worries. He spoke to us concisely, praising our effectiveness, stressing the need to curb aggression while securing submission. Each phrase carried deep conviction. I thought then that I'd willingly perish if he commanded it, not from dread or duty, but from devotion, sheer and unadorned devotion to the living symbol of all I held true. Only afterward, secluded in my cabin, did I start to question. I was taken aback by the depth of my own response. From my earliest training, I'd been taught to hold the ethereals in the highest regard, just like every other caste. They served as our mentors, our thinkers, the builders of the overarching benevolence. Yet this felt different, something that cut straight past rational thought and tapped into my deepest, most instinctual core. I brushed it off as exhaustion, the instinctive reverence any tower might experience in the face of such an aura. Looking back, I should have seen it for what it was, the initial fracture in the bedrock of all my convictions. The integration efforts unfolded with flawless efficiency in the days that followed. Confronted by our insurmountable tech advantage and the assurance of assimilation over annihilation, the planetary overseer capitulated on the main landmass with hardly any pushback. A few human factions pulled back to the southern uplands, blending armed forces with fleeing non-combatants, but they presented no real danger. Our squad got tasked with locking down a data vault, a low-slung fortified structure buzzing with cogitator arrays and glowing hollow interfaces. The humans had vacated in such haste that they'd left half-consumed rations scattered across consoles, along with mugs of some caffeinated brew, now chilled and clotted. Joining us was a squad of Earthcast specialists under the command of an elder tower called Borkan Navardi. As my group established the outer defenses, the techs swept through the site, linking their gear to the alien systems and pulling out any intel that High Command considered worthwhile. Navardi stood apart from the typical Earthcast I'd encountered. Usually, they were reserved and laser-focused on their niche roles, interacting with fire warriors only to tweak gear specs. But Navardi approached me amid a lull, his gaze sharp with a fervor that clashed with his caste's usual demeanor. Quote D. He stated bluntly, his tone hushed even though we were isolated from the rest. Quote Mahoney. I couldn't grasp why he'd confide this in me, a fire warrior without access or reason to delve into data dissection. Quote 2. I replied, itching to resume my rounds. Navardi shook his head firmly in denial. Quote 3, quote 4, I urged, unease creeping in. Quote 5, quote 6, he murmured, voice even softer. Quote 7. A surge of unease rippled through me, swiftly overtaken by serenity, a deep, all-encompassing peace that ironed out every spike of worry. Naturally, Command had it under control. The Watercast knew precisely how to channel knowledge for the collective benefit. Personal inquisitiveness had to yield to unified balance. Quote K8. I responded, startled by the edge in my tone. Quote 9. He recoiled like he'd been slapped, then dropped his gaze. Understood, Shisui. I overstepped. For the greater good. For the greater good, I repeated mechanically, the phrase slipping out on autopilot. Following procedure, I relayed the exchange to my commander. Any hint of discord or doubt about authority required prompt logging and resolution. Shassel Kais commended my alertness and promised the issue would receive proper attention. Borkan Navardi vanished from sight after that. Back then, I figured he'd been transferred elsewhere. I didn't probe any deeper. The opening phase of the takeover rolled on smoothly, free of major disruptions. Human opposition remained fragmented and futile, mostly limited to tampered machinery and basic bombs that our detectors flagged well in advance. I guided sweeps across the living districts, imposing lockdowns and spotting locals with expertise that could serve the Empire. It was on one of those rounds that I came across the human girl. She emerged abruptly from the gap between two dwellings, a tiny form clad in oversized dirt-streaked jumpsuit. Her features were caked in filth, her locks tangled and ragged. By their reckoning, she couldn't have passed 7 or 8 years. My unit snapped rifles to ready, targeting reticles flashing alive. I waved them off and advanced solo. The girl held firm, no retreat, just fixed her eyes on my armor. She wore an expression that eluded me, not quite terror, but something sterner, more ancient than her tender age suggested. Quote 12. I inquired, my power armor's vocalizer rendering my query into rough low Gothic. She offered no reply. Instead, she dipped a hand into her pocket and produced an item, extending it toward me. A tiny trinket that glinted faintly in the subdued glow. I zoomed in my optic display. It was a rough-hewn Aquila amulet, emblem of humanity's faith in their rotting god-king, forged from cheap alloy and polished glossy by frequent touch. Quote 13, she uttered, the initial human phrase directed at me since our arrival on this world. Quote 14. Protocol demanded I seize it at once. Such devotional relics counted as forbidden goods under oversight directives meant for seizure and eradication to ease ideological reshaping. Yet the gravity in her gaze, the earnestness of her offering, gave me pause. Quote 15, I told her. Quote 16. She persisted in proffering the amulet, her limbs steady as stone. Quote 17. A squad member stirred restlessly. Quote 18. Before I could answer, the girl lunged ahead with startling agility. She thrust the pendant against the plated thigh of my crisis suit, then spun and fled, vanishing amid the residential blocks. I ought to have chased her, logged the incident, but rather, I bent and retrieved the fallen ornament from where it dropped after brushing my plating. I studied it closely. This trivial scrap of mortal delusion stirred an unforeseen sensation within me. Intrigue. What compelled a youngling to bestow safeguarding upon a conqueror? What creed endured amid subjugation and control? I retained the amulet, tucking it into a hidden alcove of my combat armor, the inaugural breach of regulations across my full career. I rationalized it as strategic insight, deeming insight into foe mindsets a key asset. Yet, deep down, I recognized it as more. A subtle rift in the flawless cohesion of intent that had shaped my life. That evening, alone in my allocated chamber, I inspected the pendant with greater scrutiny. The Aquila bore a hasty imprint, its pinions uneven, features eroded by endless fondling. Etched on the back was a faint engraving. Quote 19. I kept flipping it in my grasp, the foreign alloy heated beneath my touch. Doctrine had drilled into me to scorn human spirituality as backward folly, a tool wielded by their rulers to dominate the throng. But this modest token came without demand, tendered as true shelter between souls. It hinted at a paradigm I'd overlooked, one where bonds could form beyond rigid castes and directives. I stowed the amulet, unsettled by notions that felt foreign to my core. I craved resolution, sharpened resolve, renewed devotion to duty. Thus, I chose to join the dusk oration from the ethereal, my first such gathering since touchdown. The main square had transformed into a rally ground, adorned with imperial emblems in bold array. Tau from every caste assembled as twilight deepened, arraying in precise formations by role and station. I positioned among fellow Shazla, our suits shining under the installed luminance spanning the outpost. Ethereal Onkas mounted the dais with that familiar seamless poise I'd observed earlier. As he scanned the gathered host, a surge of serenity coursed through me, purging the unease of my prior musings. His aura alone acted as a soothing salve, recalibrating my outlook, mending discord in my psyche. He discoursed on advancement, on weaving this planet into the Empire's fabric, on the supreme benefit that would uplift every race to peak fulfillment. His utterances cascaded smoothly, refreshing and lucid, saturating every void inside. I caught myself agreeing, grinning, reclaiming the unshakable assurance that had long steered me. Addressing the humans, he employed phrases like, quote 20 and quote 21. His delivery held warmth, almost fondness, akin to a mentor appraising youths. Quote 22. He promised, quote 23. The unadaptable would find fitting niches, their talents channeled, flaws mitigated. It rang flawless. It shone exquisite. It embodied all I'd pledged my existence to forge. Then, why did a faint murmur linger in my mind's recesses, posing queries I'd never entertained? Why clung the vision of that human girl bestowing her talisman, even as other uncertainties dissolved? And why, gazing upon my kin Tao, did I perceive mere vacant satisfaction in each visage, as though we weren't distinct entities but mere components of one vast body advancing in unison. Unity of purpose, unity of thought, unity of resolve. The speech wrapped up with the customary pledge to the overarching cause. A multitude of voices echoed in unison, mine among them. The phrases slipped from my mouth effortlessly, honed by repetition, yet this time they rang in my ears as though uttered by another from afar. Back in my chambers, unease gripped me, not from the ethereal's words themselves, but from how I responded to them. The serenity I'd sensed in his aura was authentic, all-encompassing, unyielding, yet it felt contrived, like an external force layered upon me rather than springing from true insight or belief. Rest evaded me through the night. I remained restless, attuned to the strange noises of this foreign planet, wrestling with ideas that grew ever more perilous. Memories surfaced, the Earthcast engineer, Ovati, with his pressing inquiries and later vanishing. The human youngster, her grave gift. The unwavering allegiance I'd harbored near the ethereal and its swift erosion once he departed. Something felt off. Not the supreme cause, not the empire, but within myself. Doubt was creeping in, a state I'd learned was akin to sickness, a glitch in aligned cognition demanding swift remedy. I ought to head to the med bay, seek assessment, accept any intervention to realign me with the shared intent. But instead, I grasped the amulet concealed under my bedding, clutching it tightly in my hand, its contours dug into my skin. Quote 24. What constituted my defenses? My combat gear, my drills, my unshakable faith in the righteousness of the collective aim. Each was buckling now, fracturing like frost under pressure it wasn't built to withstand. Dawn of the next day delivered fresh directives. The human rebels in the southern uplands had sharpened their tactics, staging swift strikes on our logistics routes. My squad got tasked with a reprisal mission to hunt down and dismantle the rebels' leadership. We launched at first light, blending assault units with armored carriers. The straightforwardness of warfare operations soothed me after the turmoil of the prior evening. On the battlefield, objectives boiled down to essentials: endure, fulfill the objective, safeguard your comrades. The deeper quandaries that had gnawed at me receded, overshadowed by pressing operational demands. The uplands proved treacherous, jagged peaks cloaked in dense woods, slashed by profound gorges and abrupt fog veils that disrupted our detection. The humans had picked a smart hideout, leveraging the landscape for peak effect. Our progress crawled forward, deliberate and cautious, with scout drones probing ahead to spot dangers and foe outposts. It was approaching noon when we stumbled on the initial traces of structured opposition. Rudimentary, yet cunning snares dotted our anticipated path, trigger pads linked to concealed blasts. Our detectors caught the bulk of them, though one rear vehicle hit a device, shearing off a drive segment and halting it briefly. While our techs patched the harm, I seized the moment to scrutinize the area closer. The snare layout nagged at me. They weren't aimed at peak devastation, but to steer our path toward seemingly clearer, advantageous ground. Shassel, I signaled via comm to my leader. These traps look more like guides than killers. They're probably herding us into a trap site. Silence lingered before Kai's replied, his tone icy. Duly acknowledged, Shizui. That said, High Command mapped our course via thorough intel review. We'll stick to the plan. I yearned to argue, to demand that on-the-ground intel trump preset strategies amid shifting dynamics. Yet protocol silenced me. I'd already flagged myself with the Ovati filing. More pushback could label me unreliable, maybe tainted. We pressed on the plotted trail, entering a wide basin flanked by sheer, timbered hillsides. Ideal setup for a pincer strike. My gut screamed alerts, far too vulnerable, too foreseeable. Still, command stood firm, so I led my unit onward. Scanners cranked to full, arms primed and primed. The assault, when it struck, didn't hail from the humans. A Watercast delegate had joined our foray, a lithe, mild-mannered figure called Poradalith Mayan. He rode in the lead transport alongside Shassel Kai's, likely to seize any negotiation openings amid the op. I'd barely registered him, as Watercast matters seldom crossed into active skirmishes. Midway through the basin, He called for the convoy to pause, invoking the necessity of setting up a link to headquarters. Such a demand struck me as odd out in the open, in the heart of enemy land, yet Kais endorsed the plan without a second thought. The convoy halted, units locking into protective formations as comms gear was set up. I saw Mayan hurry over to Kais, talking fast and pointing at the wooded hills encircling us. Their words didn't reach me, but Kais's stance shifted. He grew sharper, more intent. Right away, he sent fresh directives via the control link. Every squad, we've spotted key objectives. Human commanders pinned in Zone 7 on the northeast hill. Zero in on the marked spots. Combat screens refreshed with strike details. I paused, poring over the info. That targeted zone registered 0 thermal readings, no stir, nothing indicating people were there. Either their tech had leaped to flawless invisibility or we were blasting at ghosts. Chazelle, verify the target intel, I messaged via comms. My scans detect no foes at those points. Carry out the commands, Shazui. Shot back without delay. Open fire. Nearby, fellow battle armor squads were already swinging their armaments into place, gearing up to hammer the barren woods. I froze, caught in a bind of clashing duties. Protocol called for compliance. Doctrine urged checks before wasting ammo, and some gut instinct, unnamed, pushed me to grasp the truth. I flipped my comm to a secure line with my unit. Cease shooting, I commanded. Stay put and alert, but skip hitting those marks till we see eyes-on confirmation. Affirmation signals from my crew lit up green across my HUD. They had faith in me, sticking to my call just as I'd always heeded my officers. What I was pulling off amounted to defiance, maybe outright rebellion mid-fight. Still, I couldn't pull the trigger on a phantom. The broader force wasted no time. Bursts of energy bolts, rocket waves, and searing blasts poured from scores of spots, all zeroed on that tree-lined crest. The assault was brutal, shredding foliage into fragments, cracking stone, billowing clouds of ash and rubble skyward. If any foes lurked there, they'd be vaporized, wiped clean. While the pounding raged, I swept my gaze to the facing ridge, the side we'd ignored in our frenzy. A quick flash of motion snagged my focus. I zoomed in on the visuals, tuning past the haze and grit choking the basin. There, people, not on the hill we were wrecking, but the neglected western face. Not ragtag fighters, but troops in gear, advancing methodically and with intent. They hauled big guns, positioning them smoothly, claiming vantage points with direct views of our line. Chazelle, hostiles verified on the West Hill, I relayed in a rush. Major arms setting up, clearance to hit real threats? Silence. The lead channel stayed mute while we kept smashing the vacant east side. In horrified shock, I observed the humans wrap up their setup unchallenged, barrels now locked on our vulnerable setup. I had mere moments to choose a path that would reshape my destiny. Stick to instructions and witness my Tau comrades slaughtered from some baffling blunder, or go rogue, maybe spare souls, but mark myself a traitor. All members of Squad Cowhui, I transmitted to my group. Fresh objectives locked, West Hill bearings incoming, strike now. My interface caught my team's brief waver, readouts blinking amid doubt and uncertainty. Then, sequentially, they synced to my aim points, swiveling toward the true danger. Energy pulses streaked from us, slamming the enemy gun nests right as they readied to unleash. The shock hit hard. Our synced salvo took out their big gun crews in the opening instance. The leftover humans broke apart, diving for shelter, firing back in scattered, futile shots. To all mission squads, I sent over the open freck, ditching rules outright. Critical foes on West Hill. Several major gun sites. East Hill empty. No hostiles spotted. Shift aim at once. The reply wasn't tactical correction. Rather, an internal guard unit started closing in on me, arms live but not pointed my way yet. Kais's tone sliced the chaos, icy and exact. Shazui Tfar, you're stripped of authority. Shut down your armor and ready for removal. Guard detail, bring the Shazui to main outpost for review. I couldn't process it. My crew had just averted a slaughter, pinpointed and struck the genuine peril. Threat as the bulk of our troops wasted rounds on a barren slope. Still, they were handling me like I'd pulled off some terrible offense. The security squad encircled my spot. 4 battlesuits, guns blatantly aimed my way. My squad stayed put, confused, torn between following their direct leader and the mission's top brass. Quote, Don't 28. I instructed them via our secure link. Quote 29. They paused, then obeyed, shifting focus back to the human lines as the guards advanced on me. I shut off my armaments but left the suit running, refusing to expose myself fully without grasping the situation. While they marched me from the front line, our remaining units at last turned their barrage toward the genuine human threats, finally recognizing the danger I'd spotted. The fight wrapped up fast and lopsided once we unleashed our complete arsenal correctly. The humans had forfeited their element of surprise, and our tech far surpassed theirs. They brought me back to the advance outpost under watch. My battlesuit's outer systems frozen, demoting me from seasoned fighter to captive. The base had shifted during the time our retaliation force had left. New safeguards were in place, with Watercast reps now openly joining every oversight role. A strain hung in the atmosphere, a fatigue among the fire warriors I noticed on my guarded trek to the holding area. They commanded me to leave my battlesuit, which they seized for inspection. Stripped of my armor, clad just in the undersuit, I felt exposed and defenseless. They guided me into a cramped, lightless chamber, featuring only a steel seat, a monitoring drone floating quietly in the corner, the entrance locking with a whoosh of air. I waited in solitude for what felt like ages, replaying the sequence that landed me here. The kid with her necklace, the Earthcast tech's inquiries. The baffling directive to shoot at a vacant crest while overlooking the real peril. Nothing fit with the ideals of the greater good that I knew. Effectiveness, unity, group endurance, these formed the foundation of our culture. But the scenes I'd encountered looked wasteful, chaotic, possibly ruinous to our shared existence. When the entrance slid open at last, I braced for Shazel Kais or maybe a guard chief. Instead, the Watercast delegate, Mayan, stepped in by himself. He regarded me with a look I couldn't read, then signaled the drone to shut off. It dropped to the ground, its lenses going dark. "You've stirred up a real mess, Shazui Tavar," he murmured, his tone mild, nearly kind. "A fire warrior who ponders independently, who challenges directives, who notices what he's supposed to miss." "I detected humans gearing up to strike our line," I responded evenly. I tackled a confirmed hazard while the group squandered assets on a vacant hill. My moves shielded our unit. Mayan offered a nod of concession. "True, you operated with strategic sense, even bravery, and that's the issue." He approached, eyeing me like a lab subject. "Tell me, have you had odd ideas lately? Reservations about leadership choices? Queries on our society's foundations?" I paused. This wasn't mere punishment talk. My reply might seal my destiny. Quote 36. I stated precisely. Quote 37. A brief grin crossed Mayan's features, vanishing fast enough to question if it happened. A polished reply, maybe some Watercast blood in your line. He paced around me gradually, voice still soothing. "But you dodged my query. Have doubts crept in?" I recalled the medallion stashed in my room, the odd detachment during the ethereal speech, the queries sprouting in my thoughts, unwanted and intrusive. Quote 40, I replied. Quote 41. Quote 42. Mayan halted right in front of me. Quote 43. He dipped into his garment's fold and pulled out a tiny item, the Aquila medallion. My inhale hitched. "This turned up in your belongings, a human faith token, forbidden goods, subversive stuff. Care to account for it?" Denial or dodging was useless. Proof sat right there. A human kid handed it over on a sweep. I held onto it to grasp foe mindsets better, without logging it, without handing it off for review. You hid it away, kept it concealed, a quiet act of defiance maybe, a fissure in the flawless solidarity of your allegiance to the Empire's cause. Mayan rolled the amulet between his digits, mirroring my own earlier motion. "Do you grasp what this signifies for them? This emblem of a cadaver?" I shook my head no. "Optimism," he murmured, his pitch sinking softer. "Optimism that outlasts mortality. Optimism that challenges reason, proof, and even the fabric of existence. The humans hold faith that their ruler oversees them from beyond the grave, that his shattered, rotting shell somehow safeguards them through the expanse of cosmos and eras." He clenched his hand tight around the amulet. Ridiculous, naturally, a backward myth, but potent enough that a youngster would present it to a foe, convinced it could guard even a Xeno essence. I lacked words to reply. The discussion had veered into unforeseen territory. My quarters felt more reflective than condemning. Quote 46. Shazuva, he declared suddenly, his manner switching to detached precision. Quote 47. Neural decay. The term was unfamiliar to me. Still, it accounted for the shifts I'd noticed, the widening gap between my inner reflections and the unified mandate of the realm. What's the cure? I inquired, a chill unease starting to coil in my stomach. Gene restructuring, synaptic bolstering. No need to fret. Mayan headed for the exit. You'll be shuttled to a dedicated healing center. Post-procedure, you'll resume duties with a spotless slate. This deviation will fade from memory. The way he worded it, the measured blankness in his face, ignited an alert in my warrior's core senses. This wasn't mere health advice. It masked something more, something withheld. And should I decline the procedure? The words slipped out before I weighed their fallout. Mayan halted, facing away. Decline? What devoted Tao would spurn vital therapy? Unless, he pivoted gradually, unless the decay has progressed beyond first evaluations. I held my tongue, abruptly realizing I teetered on an unseen fork in the road. Each phrase, each motion from here would shape a route I couldn't abandon. Relax, Shizui, Mayan advised, his tone returning to a soft, nearly empathetic warmth. The health shuttle lands at dawn. You'll receive proper attention. Once he departed, the monitoring orb hummed back to life, its lens locked steadily on me. I stretched out on the firm slab, gazing at the blank overhead, replaying Mayan's statements in my thoughts. Neural decay, a tidy diagnosis for rogue ideas, a fix to realign me with the group's consensus. It seemed logical, advantageous too. But every gut feeling signaled that the so-called healing site held not restoration, but a shadowier fate. My mind drifted to Ovadi, the Earthcast engineer who'd probed too far and vanished, to the baffling directive to blast a barren slope and my swift sidelining once I spotted the true peril, to the profound serenity enveloping me in the ethereal's aura. How it erased every uncertainty, every probe, every personal notion. Suppose that wasn't divine spark or sacred bond. Suppose it stemmed from something concrete, organic. Perhaps a chemical nudge, a scent-based dominion that skirted awareness and targeted the nerves outright. The notion bordered on blasphemy, inconceivable. Yet once it took root, it refused to fade. It clarified volumes, the blind loyalty of every caste to the ethereals, the swift accord among subjugated races upon ethereal contact, the sporadic neural decay in those who built tolerance to this hold. If accurate, my entire worldview crumbled into deception. The exalted purpose wasn't moral selection, but bondage. Our prized cohesion, not from exalted ways, but from organic dominance. Sleep eluded me. My brain churned over scenarios, consequences, paths forward. Come daylight, I'd settled on a choice. I wouldn't yield to the looming intervention. I had to break free, uncover proof, unravel the truth. Not only for myself, but for all our kind. The chance arose amid the dawn ration period. One sentry brought the sustenance platter, briefly disengaging the entry lock. He moved sloppily, unfocused, likely figuring a kindred Tau, scrutiny or not, offered little danger. My drills in hand-to-hand fighting, my reactions sharpened by decades in combat armor, stood ready. He never saw. With the uprising imminent, I grabbed his pistol and comm unit, then darted swiftly across the holding area. The place had minimal oversight. The bulk of the guards were tied up quelling the locals, not watching for inside escapes. I ran into just a couple more sentries on my way to an outer exit, and each dropped from targeted non-lethal blasts before they could trigger any alerts. Beyond the walls, the first light of day was spreading across the seized human outpost. I stuck to the dim corners, utility paths, and repair ducts, steering clear of the primary walkways where sweeps would be thickest. My target, the control hub, and in particular, the locked archive where Ovadi had toiled. Any proof of my hunch would be tucked away there, buried in secret records but not fully wiped clean. The hub's outer defenses were robust, built to fend off human rebels instead of holding Tau escapees. Yet its inner mechanisms relied on ID checks that still recognized my DNA profile and position. A backup door panel beeped softly as it let me in, registering me as cleared even in my rogue state. I hurried down empty hallways, knowing word of my breakout would circulate fast. The archive sat at the structure's heart, inside a cooled vault buzzing with databanks and glowing displays. I locked the entrance after me, punching in the sentry's overrides to bypass standard locks. The real challenge lay ahead. I wasn't some planetary tech expert. My skills with networks were straightforward and hands-on, nothing fancy. Still, I managed to pull up the central search terminal and enter key terms: neural breakdown, ghostly sense, biomanipulation, gene defiance. The machine churned through vast archives pulled from this planet and beamed in from the core worlds. Many hits were sealed tight, demanding access beyond my level, but others were just tagged sensitive, open to any officer in charge. Using clever angles, I started piecing together bits, a mosaic drawn from scattered logs, health scans on toe brain wiring, zeroing in on areas handling group signals and rank dynamics, DNA profiles revealing fine tweaks across classes, especially in scent detection genes, tests on crowds pre- and post-exposure to ethereal influences. Nothing screamed guilt on its face. Nothing spelled out my theory plain. Yet the scraps aligned into a blueprint too sharp for chance. The toe race had been shaped, our code altered across eras to obey unique chemical triggers from the ethereal elite alone. We were built for obedience, harmony, yielding to a force that was chemical, not abstract. I got so lost in the revelations that I nearly overlooked the shift in the facility's hum, the quiet change in airflow, the far-off thud of purposeful steps replacing the usual shuffle. They'd located me. No more digging. It was fight-or-flight time. I snatched as much info as possible onto a handheld unit, then pulled up the layout blueprints to scout an evasion path, dodging the incoming teams. A service crawlspace linked the data vault to an outside vent setup meant for techs to work without halting the flow. It'd be cramped but doable. I'd barely pried off the cover when the vault entrance shook from a solid blow. Breach attempt underway. Mere moments, not ages, till they cracked it. I dove into the tight passage, sealed the hatch, and inched forward through the black, lit only by dim safety glows along the base. The tunnel ended at an outer enclosure for temp regulators, a bulky setup next to the hub but past its tight guard ring. I climbed out into the daylight, eyes stinging after the gloom. Far-off sirens wailed across the base now. My flight was out in the open. Every unit would mobilize. I had to leave this rock. A tall order for a solo runaway with no backup or gear. But I held one edge. Deep familiarity with Firecast routines, the standard grids for hunts and lockdowns they'd roll out next. They'd figure I'd bolt for the wilds past the outpost edge, the obvious route for any jailbird. Rather, I pressed further into the controlled sector, aiming for the launch field where our ships ran steady hauls to the ships above. If I could slip onto a freighter, maybe even hide boarding a bigger transport could get me out of the immediate pursuit. Beyond that, what came next was anyone's guess, a void in my strategy. The spaceport buzzed with constant motion, Earthcast laborers hauling gear, Firecast guards verifying logs and scanning entryways. From my hidden vantage, I scanned for routines, weak spots, and chances to slip through. A lone Earthcast operator piloting a cargo hauler drew my eye. It was shifting crates from a warehouse to a ready shuttle. The driver looked worn out, operating with the rote efficiency of someone locked into endless shifts. I held back until he looped back to the warehouse, then darted across the exposed stretch to the idle hauler. All my instincts alert for any alarm, every fiber ready to react if spotted. Yet I made it undetected, squeezing into the cab behind the seat in an awkward crouch. When he came back, he gave the dash just a quick glance before firing it up and heading out again. The machine rumbled alive, lumbering toward the shuttle pad. I stayed frozen, regulating my breaths, merging mentally with the surrounding tech. His focus stayed glued to the job, his weariness my unwitting cover. Reaching the shuttle, another laborer guided the offloading of the crates. Peering through a slim slit, I timed my move as they locked everything into the hold. With the last crate in place, the pair exchanged a few words, then stepped off to handle the paperwork. The hold stayed ajar, its depths dim and unattended for the moment. Drawing on my cast's innate agility, I flowed across in a few swift bounds, hauling myself into the gloom of the cargo area before they glanced over. Pulse racing, I tucked between two fastened crates, out of easy view but able to watch the entrance. Time dragged on for what felt like ages as last-minute setups wrapped up. Snatches of crew chatter filtered in during systems tests. I sensed the faint thrums as power built. Finally, the bay sealed with a whoosh of air, dropping the space into obscurity lit only by dim lights on the crates. Launch hit with a jolt that slammed me against the hard surfaces. We climbed, shedding the world's pull, vectoring to the fleet above. I'd dodged the chase for now, but peril still loomed. Getting found on board spelled quick nab with no escape in the tight quarters. The trip to orbit flew by. The shuttle built for swift hops from ground to space. I noted the engine shift as we neared a bigger ship's bay. The slowdown from auto guidance, then the lock-in jolt from clamps. Fresh voices rang out, shuttle team syncing with bay staff. Unloading, checks, and sorting lay ahead. My shot at slipping away hung by seconds, the line between exposure and pushing on. The doors parted, exposing the vast belly of what seemed a logistics hauler, bulkier than a fighter and geared for support over battle. It promised better hideouts and exploitable setups. I observed as the team started systematically pulling crates, cross-referencing tags with the manifest. Biding my time until they zeroed in on one at the bay's end, I eased out, gliding through the gloom along the docking struts. A side passage beckoned from the main area, probably linking to service zones across the ship. I ducked in without pause, widening the gap from my entry. The path delved further, splitting into a web of tech conduits, climbways, and back routes meant for engineers, not everyday crew. I navigated by the ship's layout hints, the uniform designs all large vessels shared. Core zones teemed with traffic, locks, and eyes. Edge functions like recycling and life support ran mostly on auto, with scant oversight. I headed to a water recycling nook, a steamy, tight spot packed with filters and reservoirs. The steady drone of gear would drown my noises, and the dank setup kept visitors rare. I spotted a service hatch, but behind a line of filtration units, I'd carved out a narrow nook, sufficient for me to hunker down out of sight from any cursory glance. For the initial moment since fleeing, I finally permitted myself to confront the events fully, to grapple with the revelations I'd uncovered. The realm I'd devoted myself to, slain in defense of, and embraced with unwavering faith, was founded on organic manipulation, not profound ideology. The supposed higher purpose wasn't voluntary but enforced, a chemical tether yanking everyone toward the desires of the ethereals, and I'd become impervious, or at minimum, tolerant to it. An alteration in my brain chemistry had occurred, enabling me to perceive the manipulative structures in their raw form. The brain erosion that Mayan had identified turned out to be cerebral liberation, the capacity to reason and doubt free from ethereal sway. I pulled up the files I'd snatched, examining them with greater scrutiny now that my immediate peril was on hold. The health records were patchy and partial, yet they revealed a trend of unusual biochemical reactions among select Firecast personnel, especially those with prolonged battlefield exposure to particular foes. References to the Imperium of Man cropped up frequently, implying that contact with human mentalities, or maybe their devout zeal, could interfere with the ethereal dominance. The pendant from that human youth gained fresh importance. Far from mere bauble or ritual token, it might have sparked my enlightenment. Could closeness to human belief have reshaped my neural makeup? The notion felt ludicrous, but the details staring back at me pointed to a possible link, even if not direct cause. Far more unsettling were the documents on handling those impacted. No soft remedial care, but ruthless brain rewiring, genetic tweaks to boost sensitivity to ethereal sense, targeted recall wiping to excise clashing memories, and for the ones judged beyond repair, mercy killing masked as dignified transfer to elite study sites. I'd never have endured the process without losing who I was. The result would have sported my features and title, yet remained a vacant husk, a drained container repacked with total obedience. That insight chilled me to the core, leaving me adrift in a cosmos abruptly void of purpose. All I'd held sacred, battled over, and been ready to perish for amounted to an elaborate fabrication. Not mere governmental ruse or societal restraint, but deep-seated organic subjugation of my whole race. What path lay ahead for me? Returning to the Empire was impossible. Reintegrating into a civilization I now viewed as an enormous cage was out of the question. Still, I possessed no alternative haven, no comrades, no supplies save my personal expertise and resolve. I stood isolated in a manner no tower ever should, severed from the shared destiny that shaped our lives. The vessel's machinery thrummed nearby, its rhythmic pulse ticking away the seconds as I pondered untenable choices. Might I connect with fellow Tau, impart my findings? Could they even grasp it, their psyches still shackled by molecular bonds? Would exposing the reality liberate them, or merely paint me as a lethal anomaly warranting destruction? My reverie shattered with a shift in the ship's noises, the constant drone-altered tone, drive arrays firing up with greater force. We were in motion, speeding from our orbital slot. To gauge the implications of this accidental voyage, I had to pinpoint our heading. I slipped from my shelter, navigating the service passages to a data terminal. All ships housed consoles for engineers to oversee operations and pull routine route info. I located one in a climate regulation hub, deserted for the moment. The screen verified the propulsion cues. We'd escaped orbit and were charting a departure course, gaining velocity toward the Manderville Nexus. This wasn't a standard haul from world to space fleet. We geared up for warp leap, departing the Corveza domain altogether. Using the guard's stolen codes, I queried the assignment details. Our endpoint, a Tau inquiry base labeled Exploration Sphere 9212, situated in an uncharted stellar cluster a few warp hops from Corveza. The cargo included lab gear, unique compounds, and living test subjects. A shiver hit me at that last entry. What sort of bio-study demanded shipment to an isolated station distant from the core territories? Considering my fresh grasp of imperial tactics and the essence of ethereal rule, I dreaded anything positive. I probed further, hunting for more on the base and its aims. Much was locked behind higher clearances, but I uncovered mentions of the creation of pheromones and advanced neurological tools for enforcing obedience. Their efforts focused on crafting upgraded methods of domination, intensified forms of the chemical ties that already held our kind in thrall. This craft wasn't just a freighter for provisions. Instead, it carried essentials for advancing the subjugation process, for drawing tighter the unseen shackles linking us to the desires of the ethereals. And here I was, on board, steering straight into the heart of that malevolence. The twist could have seemed comical under less dire circumstances. By evading one snare, I'd landed myself right in the line of fire for something possibly much more sinister. Still, it offered a chance as well. Reaching this scientific base might allow me to uncover fuller details on those domination tools, maybe even discover means to sabotage them, to liberate fellow captives. Just as I'd broken free, a bold scheme started taking shape in my thoughts. Not flight at this point, but calculated intrusion. I'd stay concealed en route, then exploit the disorder of docking and cargo discharge to sneak into the lab complex. Once inside, I'd collect any data I could on the biomanipulation setups, the scent-based tech, whatever, might reveal ways to resist. It was a scheme fueled by urgency, with slim odds of pulling off and enormous hazards. But what other path existed? Returning to blind subjugation was impossible. I couldn't erase the glimpse of reality I'd caught. Pushing ahead remained the sole viable course, no matter the perils ahead. The trip to exploration spheres 9 through 12 lasted 17 days, per the vessel's timers that I checked now and then during quick ventures from my shelter. 17 days of tight confinement, precisely scheduled excursions to grab scant rations from storage holds, and endless watchfulness to avoid detection. My Firecast build suited me for stretches of scarcity, for functioning in harsh environments. Yet when I sensed the gentle lurch as the ship exited warp, I felt drained, fatigued, diminished to a fraction of my prior strength. But my determination had grown firmer amid the seclusion. Every day of lone reflection had stripped away further traces of indoctrination, another thread from the hidden mesh ensnaring my thoughts. Flashes from my past duties came back sharper now. I recognized the webs of influence and restraint that had molded my entire life. Instances where questions had stirred only to dissolve in an ethereal's proximity. Blind obedience to commands clashing with evident facts. The total lack of real questioning in what we called an advanced civilization. It all clicked into place at last, not from some exalted wisdom or creed, but as signs of a global chemical bondage affecting our race. As the ship latched onto the outpost, I felt prepared. I'd mapped the ship's design, noted the patterns in the team's routines, pinpointed the perfect instant to act. With goods starting to shift, I emerged from cover and blended into the frantic bustle of offloading. The outpost turned out more compact than expected, tailored for niche experiments over broad functions. A core nexus linked to 3 sprawling lab extensions, the whole setup embedded in the crust of a tiny, barren satellite circling a colossal gas world. Through the fortified windows, stars gleamed steadily in the void, untouched by any air to scatter their glow. I proceeded with intent, mimicking the sharp focus of auxiliary workers, angling my features away from scrutiny. My fire warrior frame could stand out in a site probably filled mostly with earth and water caste individuals, but the instinctive respect for fire caste types aided me. Nobody questioned me outright while I threaded through the strange passages. I required entry to the key research files, to the essence of the experiments underway. The central nexus struck me as the prime spot for main controls, overseeing efforts in the dedicated branches. I headed there, watchful for defenses exceeding routine safeguards. The nexus formed a round room ruled by a holo display unit, presently showing what looked like drifting molecular models in mid-air. Consoles encircled the edges, largely empty for the moment, screens flickering with data flows and eval metrics. Across the way, a water-caste overseer discussed matters with a pair of earth-caste scientists, their focus locked on a handheld device instead of the space around. I claimed an empty console, settling in to seem engrossed in its output while staying attuned to the others nearby. The interface demanded ID checks for deeper entry, yet entry-level info open to all personnel. I delved into the initiative summary. Searching it supplied vital background on the ongoing experiments. The details validated my deepest suspicions and exposed atrocities I hadn't even conceived. The program's name, Pheromone Enhancement Initiative. Main goal, bolster neural obedience protocols for every non-ethereal class. Additional aim, craft distribution methods for recently encountered races to speed up their assimilation into the overarching benefit. They weren't just upholding the current dominance structures, they were amplifying them, forging stronger molecular ties to guarantee total submission. Worse still, they were turning these tools into armaments for deployment against outsiders, essentially engineering a type of biochemical assault aimed at supplanting free will with fanatical loyalty to the realm. I kept sifting through the available files, taking in the detached accounts of obedience trials on individuals from different classes. The cold records of heightened brain reactions to upgraded pheromone mixtures. Mentions appeared of defiant participants employed in final stage evaluations. Their mind activity tracked as ever, more potent agents were introduced until cerebral activity stopped. They were executing Tau who resisted, treating them as guinea pigs to fine-tune the thresholds where their dominance agents turned deadly instead of just coercive. And all this under the banner of the collective welfare, rationalizing organic subjugation as essential for societal cohesion. My fists tightened on their own, a rush of fury briefly eclipsing my strategic composure. This wasn't the civilization I'd battled to grow, not the destiny I'd trusted in. This was a nightmare in disguise, cloaked as progress, wielding rhetoric of togetherness to conceal utter tyranny. Quote 49. A voice stated from right behind me, even and composed. I reined in my gut impulse to lash out, to neutralize the danger. Instead, I pivoted with calculated calm to confront the one speaking, an ethereal, slighter, and more aged than the typical guards, his hide a lighter azure, his gestures more deliberate, yet clearly from the elite class, the molecular overlords of our kind. He regarded me with those vast perceptive orbs, a subtle grin tugging at his lips. He went on, his tone harmonious, pacifying. I sensed it right away, that customary tide of tranquility attempting to flood my psyche, the drive to yield, to bow, to embrace without doubt. Yet with knowledge of its origin, I pushed back. Not fully, not without strain showing, but sufficiently to guard my inner resolve against the molecular barrage on my autonomy. Quote 52. I replied, the half-truth simpler to hold than an outright lie. Quote 53. The ethereal's gaze sharpened a touch, his head angling as he examined me closer. Inquisitiveness is more an earth-cast quality than one in flame fighters. He stepped nearer, and the molecular strain on my thoughts intensified, a constricting veil of false peace seeking to bury any spark of autonomy. What is your identifier, Firecast? I dared not reveal my true self, not with my status likely marked as outlaw by this point. Shazla Vioritan, I declared, adopting the status of an ordinary trooper over my actual role as squad commander. You bear no clan insignia, the ethereal noted, orbiting me at a leisurely pace. The mental strain kept mounting, rendering it harder to sustain the ruse, to fend off the innate pull to drop to my knees, to yield, to spill all. They got ruined in the cargo handling, I forced out, struggling to hold my tone even, my stance firm. Orders were to request new ones once we landed. The ethereal executed a minor motion, a graceful snap of slender digits. Naturally, such a shame. He halted right in front of me, near enough for me to catch the faint aroma wafting from him, the dominance agent now recognized and comprehended. Head to the health center, Shaza. You look off. This wasn't optional. It was an order issued with full assurance of compliance. Every impulse ingrained and trained into me over lifetimes urged obedience, to trail without hesitation, to yield to this entity's embodiment of the collective good. I nearly gave in. The force was crushing, a burden grinding into every recess of my consciousness. But a kernel of defiance endured, a tough nugget of identity that wouldn't dissolve. The human amulet flickered in my thoughts, an emblem of rebellion against powers asserting total rule. Quote, E62. Quote, 63. I responded, dropping my gaze in feigned respect as my brain whirled with getaway plans. He promised to stay by my side, that soft smile fixed on his features. My safety matters to me, he added. He might not grasp the full details of my identity or my path to this place, but he sensed the defiance within me, the breakdown in his chemical manipulations that failed to enforce total obedience. I had been flagged as a danger already, a defiant individual to be isolated, examined, and eventually disposed of. Side by side, we navigated the arching hallways of the facility, the ethereal keeping up a friendly chat as though we were peers instead of jailer and prisoner. He described the projects underway, the progress in tools for societal harmony, his polite terms for the mental shackles his kind was crafting for my people. Unity of intent serves the common cause, he said calmly, like a wise guardian. Personal deviations breed waste, strife, pain. We end that pain by syncing every mind to one unified root. No options, I replied, the phrase slipping out before I could hold it back. No liberty, he displayed no fury at my remark, just a pitying, tolerant grin. Liberty is a mirage, Firecast, an idea born only from clashing with the inherent structure. In nature, does the hunted creature ponder its liberty as the hunter's teeth sink into its neck? Does the planet reflect on its liberty while locked in its star's gravitational pull? Every form of life involves restrictions, edges, confines. We've merely refined the kindest version of that innate structure. We arrived at a locked entrance adorned with health icons and hazard alerts. The ethereal pressed his hand to the reader, and the panels parted to expose a sterile area packed with cutting-edge gear. Unlike ordinary care centers, this held binding devices linked to exam tables, brain scanners, and delivery systems tied to secure vials, not for recovery, but for chemical reprogramming or execution. Step inside, the ethereal invited, motioning to the main station. Our experts will ease your unease. There was no way to keep up the pretense any longer, no outcome where I let them strap me down and kept my psyche whole. To endure, to cling to the mental independence I'd fought so hard for, I needed to move at once, no matter the fallout. I attacked suddenly, a targeted hit to the cluster of nerves low on the ethereal's neck, a lethal move drilled into Firecast fighters, though forbidden for use against our exalted leaders. His gaze expanded in astonishment, incredulous that a Firecast would dare such profound blasphemy, such inconceivable assault on an ethereal. He collapsed onto the ground, alive but stunned, voiceless and helpless. The chemical haze that had clouded my thoughts lifted as his awareness dimmed, sharpening my mind to lethal clarity. Alerts would blare any moment. An ethereal's vitals were surely tracked constantly, any anomaly sparking swift action. I had mere minutes, or even instants, before guards swarmed this spot. I hauled the limp ethereal inside the treatment room and locked the entrance after us. His frame was slight, more delicate than the sturdy build of Firecasts, yet another marker of how evolution had divided our race into specialized roles. The gear there supplied exactly what I required: bindings to fasten the ethereal to the exam table, brain trackers to verify his pulse and neural activity persisted, and above all, implements crafted for delicate neural procedures. My scheme was abhorrent by any measure in Tau culture, beyond pardon, the gravest breach of all I'd been raised to honor, but essential if the reality was to surface, if liberty could transcend the delusion our chemical overlords scorned. The ethereal stirred back to awareness while I set up the devices, his wide eyes fluttering in bewilderment, then flaring in terror as the truth dawned. He attempted words, but the nerve impact had frozen his speech temporarily, muting the enchanting tone that wielded such sway. "I am Shisui Tava," I informed him, my tone cool and professional as I adjusted the neural setup. "Once a devoted agent of the realm, now an outlaw fleeing the deceptions you label the common cause." A spark of awareness lit his gaze, chased by something like dread. An ethereal, terrified of a simple fire warrior. Such an idea would have felt utterly foreign just weeks before. "Your species has bound us chemically across eras," I went on, arranging the tools: pheromone dominance, brainwashing, DNA alteration. "You erected a dominion not on philosophical," Ruth hesitated, "driven not by mercy but by an unyielding biological urge." His head twitched feebly in refusal, though the bindings thwarted any real opposition. The medical apparatus buzzed softly as it finished aligning itself, probing his distinct biology and charting the unique organs that generated the dominating pheromones. "I'm extracting those organs," I informed him, observing the terror swelling in his gaze. "Not to end your life, but to liberate you, to render you like everyone else, equal, reliant on logic instead of chemical supremacy." In our culture, such an intrusion was an outrage without parallel. Interfering with an ethereal without consent was forbidden. Injuring one was inconceivable. Surgically modifying one, stripping away the core biological traits that established their status and role in society, there was no term for it, no notion in Tao tradition for this degree of sacrilege. Nevertheless, as the device initiated its meticulous operation, directed by my commands yet executing with a flawlessness beyond human hands, I experienced no regret. Just an icy conviction that this was essential. Harsh reality, no matter how brutal, trumped even the kindest deception. The process was rapid. The advanced tools, crafted for brain alterations, removed the pheromone-secreting organs with scarcely any harm to nearby structures. I stored the organic samples in a secure vial, a concrete testament to the chemical manipulation that had molded Tau civilization from its ancient origins. While the apparatus closed the wounds, the ethereal stayed alert, his stare fixed on me. Hatred burned there now, fierce and intimate, unlike anything I'd witnessed from his kind. They typically exuded an aura of aloof kindness, a superior empathy. Yet, bereft of his chemical command, he was merely human, furious, terrified, desecrated, ordinary. "Quote 66, he uttered, his speech recovering as the numbness receded. "Quote 67, quote 68. I responded, fastening the vial with its incriminating contents. "Quote 9. The sirens erupted then, piercing and unrelenting. Defense protocols at last detected the ethereal's altered state, activating a full station emergency. My window had closed. I glanced once more at the subdued form strapped to the examination table. This entity who had once demanded unwavering allegiance via biological manipulation, not genuine allegiance. No words could span the chasm between my former self and this transformed version. I pivoted, heading for the locked exit, plotting paths across the outpost, trails to possible getaway vessels. Prospects were slim, survival chances nearing nil. Yet I possessed the proof now, the tangible validation of my revelations. If I could somehow contact allies, if I could pierce their programming just long enough to reveal the facts, it might alter everything. The ethereal shouted behind me, his tone gaining force, propelled by rage and shame. Our system remains better. Structure outshines disorder, cohesion endures over fracture. Even absent the pheromone link, the rationale for the common welfare stands unassailable. I halted at the threshold, turning for one last view. Maybe so, but henceforth it will be a decision, not an instinct, and that shifts everything. I crossed into the turmoil, launching the concluding stage of my uprising against all I'd once held sacred. Survival to disseminate the facts, or perishing in this clinical lab. Either way, I was liberated, genuinely unbound for the first time in my life. The neural organ rendering me vulnerable to ethereal sway lingered in my form. But my consciousness had forged defiance, a shield against the molecular shackles gripping the rest of our race. As I navigated the facility, dodging patrols, clashing only when unavoidable, steadily advancing to the landing areas in hopes of flight, I realized I'd evolved into something singular. Beyond a mere outlaw, felon, or betrayer of the realm, I was the inaugural truly autonomous Tau in eons. The pioneer who perceived the confines of our unseen cage and elected an alternate route. Humans possessed an idea their offspring had attempted to convey. Belief guards the spirit when defenses crumble. That might be my discovery. Not in their sovereign or creed, but in the basic pursuit of inquiry, skepticism, rejection of unquestioning submission. A conviction rooted not in imposed power, but in the liberty to forge one's course, to define one's reality. No matter what lay ahead in this instant, whatever faint hope of endurance persisted, I pressed onward without remorse. The collective benefit, though it might still qualify as a valid creed, it could nonetheless point the way ahead for my race and countless more. True worth, however, would emerge only from voluntary embrace, not from enforced chemical coercion. I, Shazui Tavar, formerly a steadfast offspring of the realm, had evolved into its most profound dissenter, not by spurning its core tenets, but by demanding their authentic achievement, unbound by the insidious links of organic domination. A modest uprising, likely trivial against the galaxy's boundless reach and its ceaseless battles. Yet to me, it signified it all. That divide between mere survival and vibrant existence, between compliance and autonomy, between captivity and liberation, the last portal awaited. Through it stretched the landing zone and the destiny to come. I moved ahead into the unknown, into promise, into liberty.